This and the overhead diagrams that follow will show the lighting for this series of images. We're starting on the shady side of a senior's house. On the shady side of her house, we can see that the light is off color and coming from every direction except the one we want. I added a fuzzy reflector in the path of the sunlight and reflected it to the subject. Using the silver side of a fuzzy reflector placed in sunlight about 20 feet away reflected lots of light to her. But it caused this problem: excessive contrast and shininess on the face. Then, because the light wasn't what I wanted, I used the mirror side of the reflector to direct sunlight into a diffusion scrim to soften that light. So by using the mirror side to shine strong sunlight into a nearby scrim, we've given her beautiful soft light. Backing up, we see the scrim's effect. Notice that the front of the scrim is brighter. I feathered the reflected sunlight to the front of the panel so that the majority of the light is in front of her. These images are straight out of the camera with no color corrections at all. I placed her in the shade with the sun to her back to start the process. Obviously, she needs a key light. And I did that by reflecting the sunlight with the mirror side of my fuzzy reflector into a scrim. Another one of my high-quality overhead diagrams. Sometimes I needed to use two reflectors. Using one reflector panel shining into the scrim gave me some light, and that's usually enough. In this case, her lower body is lit okay, but her face wasn't bright enough. The second panel gave her face more exposure and better color, and the background went a bit deeper due to the increased illumination on the subject. See how far you can redirect sunlight? The panel and the subject are about 40 feet apart. In fact, it's a good idea to place the reflector a distance away so that the sunlight spreads over a large area of the panel. Here you can see the soft main light that the nearby translucent panel creates. Behind this scrim was the spot that I chose for the senior subject. I chose the spot for the look, but without reflecting sunlight into the scrim, the light in there was not very desirable. As you can see, the light is not only flat, but it's green from our right and blue from our left. Redirecting sunlight through the scrim, I got plenty of nice light. In fact, I had to feather the sunlight away from the scrim to only get this amount. This was lit with the scrim fully lit by the reflected sunlight. In dark shaded areas, it can easily be overdone, but because it's a reflector and not a flash unit, I could see that this was too much. We want our two-dimensional photographs to have a three-dimensional appearance. In our minds, warm colors come forward and cool colors recede. And it helps that skin tones are warmer than the greens and blues in outdoor settings. The following examples will demonstrate using light to direct the viewer's attention to the subject. I put him in shade, but then added a scrim with redirected sunlight on it, as well as a reflected edge separation light. Without any light control, we have a subject that doesn't stand out from the background. Adding scrimmed sunlight gives him better color and intensity. But because of the close trees causing a busy background behind him, I still need even more help in separating him from it. Adding an edge light from another fuzzy flector in the background helps a lot. We've successfully separated him from the background using light. Just for comparison, here's another view of the before and the after image. There's another reason to choose a scrim instead of just reflecting sunlight with a reflector: specularity. The next two images will compare the results of using just the reflector and then the reflector into a scrim. This image was done with the silver side of a fuzzy flector. I feathered the light to balance with the background density. But note the shiny complexion. That's because it was humid that day, and the reflector is relatively small at about 20 feet away. But by dropping a scrim in the path of the reflected light, we've increased the relative size of the light source, making softer light, helping her not to look so sweaty. For this guy, the only patch of sunlight where I had to place the reflector was too far to the side. That caused an unflattering lighting effect on his face. Also, he has a thin face, and such extreme side light thins him even more. So I placed a scrim in the path of the light reflected from the mirror side of the fuzzy flector. That allowed me to position the main light where I wanted it, rather than being limited to where the sunlight was. That black gobo in the distance blocked any excess hard stray light from causing problems on him. This is what I wanted, lighting more in front of his face. A big part of our job is knowing which tool is best for the job. Now that we've covered using a scrim for a main light, I want to touch on its use as a way to handle harsh accent light. I mentioned it earlier in the section on accent light, but I'll show it here again since I've been talking about scrims. Okay, what if we're not thrilled with the intensity of the edge light? It can tend to take attention away from the face. Softening that harsh light may be something you prefer. We can do that with a scrim, placed as close as possible to the subject. Small light discs can be placed in windows or trees to reduce unwanted sunlit hotspots. As you can see, there's raw sunlight coming in to draw attention from the softer effect that we're trying to achieve. But with the scrim disc in place, the raw sunlight is greatly reduced and diffused. Blonde hair is especially prone to being blown out by accent lighting. Everything in this image is lit properly, except her hair. I could have darkened her hair by adding more main light, but then the background would have gotten too dark. So the answer was to subtract some sunlight on her hair by scrimming it. There's great light on the front of this girl's face from my reflector, but the sunlight blew out detail in her hair and cheek, causing a distraction. A scrim placed in the path of the sunlight diffused and reduced the strength of that accent light. One more look at the before and after. It's this kind of care that we need to take for quality portraiture. I used a strobe to light her face, but the sun behind her was too strong. I could increase my strobe's power, which would then allow me to close down my aperture, thereby reducing the exposure of that sunlight on her hair. But if I did that, the lake behind her would go too dark, and it's already darker than I wanted. So the answer was to scrim that light on her hair. That brought the accent light in line with the overall exposure range. It also allowed me to lengthen the exposure on the image by about a step, and that lightened up the pond. I used a light stand with a boom arm because the scrim needed to be out over the pond. I staked the light stand into the ground so it wouldn't tip over, but the scrim isn't very heavy. Chrome is basically a mirror, so it reflects what it sees. If it sees black, it'll be black. But we want chrome to look bright and shiny. So I placed a white scrim where the chrome surfaces would see it. Without the scrim, the chrome is dull and lifeless. And with the scrim, our chrome looks more like we'd expect it to. That, along with the fog sprayer, made this happen.